Good Monday evening, folks. Chief Meteorologist Tim Pandages here with you. It's October the 7th, 2024, and we've got a major update on major Hurricane Milton this evening that continues to intensify at this hour. A Category 5 storm achieved that status earlier today. Now, it is the second Category 5 of the 2024 season. You remember Beryl, when it was well away from land, achieved Category 5 status. This is now the second, and it's in the southern Gulf of Mexico, and it is a powerhouse storm. It has really taken full advantage of a very favorable environment to overperform what all the modeling had been showing, and certainly the forecast from the National Hurricane Center that were conservative on estimates, and is now even overachieved on those as well, and as it continues to strengthen too. Now, it is a major threat to Florida by the middle of this week. We're talking a Wednesday overnight into Thursday morning landfall along the west coast of Florida. Here's a satellite imagery, most recent last couple of hours, actually. It's major Hurricane Milton, 180-mile-per-hour winds. Puts it Category 5, 157 plus mile per hour, 220 mile per hour gusts in here, moving to the east at 10 miles per hour. Central pressure has just dropped to 897. Now that makes it the second most intense hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico during the satellite era, so since the 1960s. The only one that beats it out by 2 millibars is Rita back in 2005. And as I mentioned, it is still strengthening. We could see it drop a couple more millibars and take that #1 spot and maybe even beat it on out. So what we're going off of here is the 8 o'clock advisory, and this is useful information for you if you are in the path of Milton going forward. The National Hurricane Center issues 8 separate advisories a day, 4 intermediate advisories and 4 full advisories. So we're going off of the 8 p.m. intermediate. During the full advisories that come at 5 p.m., 11 p.m., 5 a.m., 11 a.m., you're going to get a track update. So a cone will be issued, a new cone, and if any changes need to be done, that's where you can find them. Right now, we're getting updates on the watches and warnings, the storm details, and the location. So they just gave us the update showing the pressure dropping a little bit, and also its location has changed too. I want to show you the development of this storm. This is a 24-hour loop on infrared satellite imagery. Notice how ragged it was looking as it was farther to the west, and then really explosively intensified within the last 24 hours. In fact, it moved from Category 1 to Category 5 in 18 hours. Now, something interesting, too, about Milton. Let me tell you a little story here. There's only been one other Category 5 hurricane in the month of October in the Gulf of Mexico. That was Hurricane Michael back in 2018. Of course, that name was retired. What name was it replaced with? Milton. This becomes the second Category 5 in the Gulf of Mexico in the month of October. Now, as we look at this over the last couple of hours, again on infrared satellite imagery, it can tell us a lot about the diagnostics of the system itself. The filter on the satellite imagery tells us the temperature of the cloud tops. And when we've got the colors of pink and white, that's extremely cold cloud top temperatures, meaning they have grown to such an altitude that they're very, very cold. They're intense. Notice the pinks that begin to show up here in the last couple images, showing that it is continuing an intensification trend as it moves off to the east. Something I want you to also take note of here is that as we're a little bit farther to the west, you notice how the eye is a little bit bigger, and as we go farther east, closer up to the current time, the eye is beginning to shrink and almost fall in on itself. I think we're at the beginning stages of what we call, or what's called, an eye wall replacement cycle. And this leads to fluctuations in intensity. A lot of times it plateaus or even briefly weakens as the eye wall essentially collapses in on itself. And then what happens here is that we eventually see it clear out and a larger eye builds in to replace it. Usually after that, we see a spurt in intensification once again. So we may very well see it peak here at 180 mile per hour, Category 5 for the next 6 hours or so, as this eye wall replacement cycle maybe takes hold, briefly weakening it or plateauing its intensity, and then probably another burst in intensification here as the overall environment still remains very conducive. So here's the northern coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. Here's the center of Milton. We're getting winds driving the water away from the coastal areas here, so reverse storm surge going on, growing coastlines in this area. Now, as the center pushes farther to the east, we'll see the wraparound flow, and we'll see the storm surge coming in on the back side of it as it moves farther to the east here. So Yucatan here, even though right now, reverse storm surge coming on in on the back side of it. I want to switch up the imagery now and show you how it looks on visible satellite. We've got a satellite position right over top of Milton, and you can look pretty much straight down. And I want to show you these images here because it shows you something called the stadium effect. And that's when the storm is so intense and the eye is cleared out so much that you can see straight down to the surface of the ocean. It's kind of hard to make out there, but you can see the center clearing on out and giving way to the surface of the Gulf of Mexico there. It's how intense the storm is as it rolls off towards the east. So let's talk about why this storm has gotten so strong so quickly. Well, let's go beneath the hood first. Let's go down to the sea surface itself that's fueling the storm. Extremely warm water temperatures still in the Gulf of Mexico. Sea surface temperatures are in the upper 80s. You need 80 degrees or more to sufficiently transfer that heat to the storm system, and we certainly have that. Not only is it at the skin of the ocean that's really warm, is that warmth extends down to a depth. Now, why that's important, especially when we have such an intense hurricane as we have with Milton, is that you're mixing up the ocean, something called upwelling. So eventually, if it was just warm water at the skin of the surface of the ocean, it would mix up cooler waters quickly and it would be self-limiting. When you've got a depth of really warm water, you're just continuously mixing up warmth and energy. And we've had that so far. Notice in its forecast track, it does head into an area with a little bit less ocean heat content. But then we've got something called a loop current here, and that's extremely warm, deep water building up out of the Caribbean and into the Gulf of Mexico, looping on down and then heading towards the Florida Straits. This could certainly propel the storm to intensify again, but also as it moves into this area, the upper level features might not be as favorable or as conducive as they are right now. I'm going to show you what I mean here in a second. Here's now a different filter on the satellite imagery, and this is the water vapor imagery. It shows us the moisture levels in the middle of the atmosphere. Why that's important is you need moisture in the mid-levels in a tropical scenario, and we certainly have that here. But more importantly, when I put on the upper level winds, check this out. 35,000 feet up in the atmosphere, we've got diverging winds. Air is being evacuated from atop Milton, allowing it to ventilate or breathe very, very efficiently. So we've got convergence at the surface, lift, rising motion, and divergence aloft. And it's not being tilted because there's no wind shear. If there were wind shear acting on it, it would be tilting it and it would be off to the side. Its posture would be off. Right now it's standing up straight, ventilating properly, which is why it's taking full advantage of the atmospheric conditions right now, why it's so strong and why it got so strong so fast. But what's lurking out ahead of it, I want you to look to the north here. We've got increasing wind shear, and the rust color in the reds, that's very dry air. So two ingredients that will likely work to somewhat weaken Milton as it heads towards the coastline of Florida. And it's depicted here on the National Hurricane Center's most recent forecast cone. It maintains a Category 5 status right up through Wednesday morning. That's a long time to be spent at a Category 5. And then it drops down to a Category 4, and then a Category 3, still a major hurricane at landfall. I don't want you to look at this and say it's going to be a more bearable storm. When you've got a system that's a Category 5 in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, it is building up extreme wave heights, and all of that wave energy is getting pushed along its forecast track. Now, an instance of where this happened before, 2005, Katrina, Category 5 in the in the Gulf of Mexico, and weakened as it approached landfall, of course, in New Orleans. And we saw what happened there. Even making landfall as a Category 3, down from a Category 5, catastrophic damage. So don't take this lightly that it's going to be possibly not as strong as it is right now when it makes it towards the coast of Florida Wednesday night, early Thursday morning, still packing winds of 125 miles per hour. Here's a look at the increasing wind shear that it will encounter as it heads towards landfall. Winds out of the west aloft will tilt the system from the surface towards the east. And that will kind of throw it off its kilter, and it will start to weaken a little bit. Certainly as it makes it into the Atlantic, Southwest Atlantic, We'll see it down to a Cat 1. Of course, that's also due to the land interaction there. But nonetheless, it'll be a weaker storm in the Atlantic heading out to sea, but certainly a formidable system heading towards landfall Wednesday night, early Thursday morning. The jump in intensity has just been astonishing to watch here, really, folks. I mean, we went from a Category 1 all the way up to a Category 5, as I mentioned, within 18 hours, and that's the second quickest a storm has done that in the Atlantic basin on record. Again, only behind Wilma from 2005 that did that same stretch, Cat 1 to Cat 5, in 12 hours. Milton did it in 18. Let's talk impacts now. Wind, of course, is going to be a big problem. Power outage threat, and all of that wind blowing onshore means storm surge threat going up as well for major metropolitan areas like Tampa Bay in Florida. Here's how things may look in terms of the wind field as we get into 9 o'clock Wednesday night. South of the storm, southeast of the storm, we've got winds blowing from the southwest towards the north and east onshore. So this is when storm surge will be the worst in areas anywhere to the east or southeast of the center of Milton, depending on exactly where it makes landfall. Then it makes landfall late Wednesday and early Thursday. Look at some of these winds, especially in coastal areas, certainly surpassing hurricane force, getting up to maybe 95 miles per hour in places like Sarasota. It makes landfall. Wind field is expanding as it's gaining out latitude. 84 mile per hour wind gusts possible in Spring Hill. And even Orlando over 50. Then we start to see impacts on the east coast of Florida. As this reemerges out into the southwest Atlantic, we'll have onshore wind storm surge threat developing in northeastern portions of Florida. Cape Canaveral down to Palm Bay, over 50 mile per hour winds, likely a large spread power outage event. Let's talk about that storm surge now, because the update from the Hurricane Center puts 10 to 15-foot storm surge in places like Tampa Bay, down to Sarasota, even down to Port Charlotte, areas that got hit extremely hard from Ian 2 years ago, up to 12 feet of storm surge there. Then we go out to the east coast of Florida, and as the storm passes out there, we've got the onshore flow, as I mentioned, so could get up to 6 feet of storm surge in places like Jacksonville, down to Daytona Beach, Cape Canaveral. So both coasts going to be getting in on that storm surge threat. Then, of course, we have the freshwater flooding, the heavy rainfall that accompanies tropical systems. And we could be looking at a foot of rain here from Tampa to Orlando, even more than a foot to Palm Coast. So that's going to create a whole nother problem in terms of flooding. And it's already been raining for a while there. Predecessor rain events have taken their hold of Florida, and that's made the ground very, very saturated and really nowhere for the water to go. All right, elsewhere in the Atlantic, it still remains very, very busy. We've got the remnants of Kirk, Leslie, that's still a hurricane, and two other areas to watch that right now have a low chance of developing, only a 20% chance, and also a 20% chance with a wave coming off the coast of Africa. Now, if these were to develop, the next name on the list is Nadine. I want to briefly talk about the remnants of Kirk. Well, it's not really the remnants, it's a post-tropical system now that still has hurricane force winds. Why I want to show you this is because look at the forecast track. It takes it still as a post-tropical storm with hurricane force winds possibly gusting into portions of Europe, which is quite unusual. Heading into Paris, France with extremely big wind gusts and likely some big impacts as well. So the North Atlantic isn't immune to tropical systems. That's the latest on today's video on Hurricane Milton. We'll continue to track. I'll have another video for you tomorrow. If you have any questions, always feel free to reach out on social media, Facebook, Instagram, X, and on TikTok. We'll see you again tomorrow.